Welcome to NFP Ocean's Meet the Members series. In this video, our founder, Kerry Sheaves, is talking to Brad from Clarity Lab.
Hi, Brad. Welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Kerry. Thank you for having me.
Fantastic. Well, let's get straight into today's topic. We're talking about not-for-profit organisations and how they should approach building their websites, and particularly how they engage with service providers like yourself effectively. So one of the things which interests me is what the key things are that not-for-profits might be forgetting when they start looking to build a website. What are those things?
Yes, there's a number of things which need to be considered when building a website. And the first thing that I normally ask not-for-profits is, who are we actually building this website for? That's quite important and can be a bit of an interesting question to ask. And to give an example of that, when I ran a strategy session with one not-for-profit, I asked that question, and they took a pause and they sort of went, we're actually just really building this for our donors, to be honest. And that was fine, because in their situation, the people accessing the services didn't need the website as much. And it's really important to have that really set in stone, everybody on the same page about who we're building this for, because then we can start building out what that hierarchy of the website needs to look like. Then that leads into the second point around audience. So once we understand who we're building this for, we then need to really dive deep into the audience needs. And I say needs like it's not like they need to see this lovely color, but what is it that they actually need to achieve on that website? So that then leads into what's the user experience needs to look like as well. Then finally, this is a big part which a lot of people tend to forget about, is once the site's live, is what happens afterwards. And a big part of that is around what's the security, who's looking after that, what's the governance process happening or in place to make sure that the site is being maintained. There's budgets being assigned to that. It's just not going to be left there and not maintained. So in a year or two, you're sort of stuck in the same position as where you were when you first started, and having issues with the website. So they're the kind of like the big three things that I tend to tackle first when we look at the website.
You're right. Those are the things that often I think we, as not-for-profits, our first thought is we've got to have something pretty out there that is showing our brand off. But the people within not-for-profit organisations aren't necessarily professional marketers, or they're not professional web designers. They're not necessarily thinking about all the facets of who is this actually for, why would they want to even come to this site, what's their reason for being there, and what do we want them to do, whether that's just a simple call to action because we want you to donate, or whether it's more complex in that we have maybe multiple audiences. I've found in practice quite often the first point of going to redesign a website is because we've thought about one audience, and so we're really on that track. But when you start thinking about that and people challenge you like you do around, well, who is the actual audience or audiences, all of a sudden the scope of what you thought that website was going to actually do completely changes, because you realize, oh, well, what if we could get it to connect to this? Or what if we could, also provide a section for that? Or what if our staff could log in and do something, to handle our members as a part of it? What if we wanted to sell products or book events? It starts to get very complex from what was probably a really simple, scope initially, or reason for wanting to update the website. I do have a question, left afield for you around branding. So quite often what I've seen is that organisations, when they start a web project, they haven't actually spent time thinking about whether they want to change their look and feel and their brand. And is that something you would advise that they do first before embarking on a web project, or during? What would you suggest?
Definitely before, because that can hold up the process as well. Look, one thing that you can do is just spend a bit of time developing a style guide, so that you can then hand that to your web developer or to any marketing person and go, okay, this is what our brand guidelines are. There's no argument. There's no, it brings all of the stakeholders on board about what the site needs to look like as well. So it's definitely something I would recommend that you have before going into the process.
Yeah, that's a good call. Yeah. So when it comes to obviously a website project, people often have a very warped sense of how much it's going to cost and how long it's going to take to actually deliver. So what can impact delivery and budget, and what expectations should NFPs have about a website project?
Yeah, you kind of touched on it earlier when you said about the scope and the different bits of functionality. That's really important to get that scoping done and spending, I know it's not exciting, but spending time up front planning and just doing that, what we call discovery phase, about what is everything we need. And once you start putting e-commerce onto the site, that introduces complexity around making sure PCI compliance and all those sorts of things. What sort of integrations do we need to be looking at? Do we need to be integrating with your back-end systems? Maybe it's a CRM. Where's that data being held as well? Do we need to be doing anything to make sure the data has been held in Australia, not being held overseas? So there's quite a wide range of things that need to be considered when worrying about what the budget and timeline needs to look like. So spending that time up front planning, and then you've got a clear scope of what you need to do, and then you can also prioritize as well. So the first part we spoke about was understanding our customers, understanding who this is for. Okay, do we need this now, or is it something we can do later on as well? So that's definitely one thing we need to consider. The other is just making sure we've got our content. So we just spoke about having style guide in place, which is really important, but having all the other content as well. So what type of wording do you want on the site? Images is really important as well. And I would highly recommend, especially for not-for-profits, is don't use stock images and actually take the time to get a photographer out, taking real-life images for the website. It just brings that story alive, and people can connect to the organisation better as well. And the other thing that I find can impact timelines and budgets and that sort of stuff is approvals. So once again, coming back to the discovery, just making sure, have we identified everybody who needs to be part of this approval process? It also falls in line with the governance piece as well. Because I've had it in the past where we've built something, it's gone live, and then all of a sudden a board member's come and gone, oh, I don't really like that. And it's kind of like, well, we should have been discussing that earlier. So if you want to change all that, it's a bunch of rework we need to do and that sort of thing. So it's just in making sure that we've got those foundations set up front, everyone's on the same page, and then we can move forward efficiently as well.
Yeah, I think, one of the things I've seen drag projects out, and I'm talking by a year at times, is the content. We can put together a really great looking shell and all the moving parts of the site, but your web developer can't write the content for you. It's got to come from the organization. And so if there's no priority very much as a start of the process of what is it we actually need to convey, and who are we talking to, and what are the things we want them to do, and what are the messages that we want out there. If you're scrambling around when there's a really nice framework being created and it looks and feels lovely, but it's now waiting for content, and it's all just dummy content sitting in there for 6 months because nobody's taken ownership of that inside your organization, then it's a huge waste of time and energy, and it means you guys are chasing there's nothing you can do until the content's there. So it's a major problem for most organizations. For
sure. And to add to that as well is, as you said, we've put dummy content in there to give you what the look and feel will be, and everyone goes, oh, that looks great. The content comes through, and that can change. It changes the look and feel. And then you need to go back to do the rework. So having that content up front means we can consider everything up front. And just at least get those initial concepts done and approved in a more timely manner. So I've seen that happen in the past where, we've got this as you said, lovely framework, lovely look and feel. The content comes in and it's just changed the whole feel of the site. So
yeah, and I think probably the other thing that you mentioned earlier is maintenance, and I often think that organizations have this set and forget mentality about their website. So you'll go and have a look at a not-for-profit's website. You can see that it's in an old kind of template. There's things that aren't working. There's very old photography, often of people that haven't even been with the organization on their team for years. That it hasn't been touched. It's not up to date. And the problem with that, I think, is that if you have a set and forget mentality and you're not catering for even just annually doing a review and making sure that what your website is saying and doing is fresh, you don't have to fully overhaul it, but at least make sure everything actually is current, even if it's updated images to show new things you're doing, then it almost can work against you. So if I'm a donor and I'm looking at an organization's website thinking I want to support it, and it hasn't had a website update since 2020, I'm going to question whether it's active as an organization. So I'd be almost better off having no website than having a website that shows that I'm doing nothing at that point. So what would you suggest is a good maybe review process that they should be undertaking, and how often, to make sure that their website is dynamic and that it is keeping a pace with what their organisation growth is?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, because it really depends on the organisation as well. So if you're kind of at the start, it might not need it as often. But if you're quite a larger not-for-profit, then definitely you want to be making sure as the site grows, all those hygiene factors are taken into consideration. It's really, there's no real one answer, if I can say that. It's really sitting down going, okay, what is that strategy for the website? Is it, we're quite happy at this stage to be able to be updating every 2 months. Maybe that's not good enough. Maybe it's every month. For me personally, I would recommend at least every month that you're going through, just making sure things are not broken, and you got even simple things like, have we got people who used to be part of the organisation? Have they left? Have they got access? All those sorts of things need to be done on a regular basis. And just one point I wanted to come back to was, it also doesn't matter about the platform you use. A lot of people talk about, if you're using Wix, if you're using Webflow, whether you're using WordPress and that sort of stuff. Some of the, I guess a misconception is, if you are building on those platforms like a Wix, that it is a set and forget. It's not. As you kind of mentioned, it's the content that needs to be updated, user access, all that sort of stuff still needs to be managed on a regular basis.
Yeah, and I think this is, from a budgeting point of view, this is a tough one for not-for-profits, because quite often their approach to putting together a website may have come because they've got some funding to do it, or they've set aside, they've finally put together a bit of money to say, well, let's get a decent website done. But what they're not factoring in is the maintenance component of that website. And so I think it's really important when we're, working with not-for-profits, to help them understand this isn't just something that you set and then you just don't have to touch now for, the next 5 years. Even if you change no content on it, even if that's not what's needed, and I would suggest that's probably unlikely, there may be minor changes, especially if there's a, our team page or something. But even just from making sure that all of the various widgets and things that are attached to that website work, making sure that all the connections or links that are on that website, which often there's a link of some kind to even an email or a form, are working properly. And then from a security point of view, that's important as well. One of the areas where we often see NFPs fail in is in their cybersecurity, and they don't realise that there's lots of different ways that they can be attacked. That can be through their emails, it could be through their website, if they haven't made sure that they're looking after that, and that there's a cost to doing that. they become vulnerable, and especially if they're allowing access into their back-end systems through their website.
Yes, definitely. That's a critical point. It's sort of getting now into nitty-gritty about how does the website integrate with that back-end system. And it's quite important to understand that we're not, ideally we want to be able to drag information from the system. So we're not making the website being able to connect or send information. But there's a lot of considerations around that piece. That's very critical. A lot of people forget about that as well. And I guess another part that's just come to mind is a big gap is with the website, it generally falls somewhere with somebody who's in marketing. And there's no real clear ownership. And I think that's also a critical piece which people forget about. Who actually owns this website, to make sure that they're accountable, making sure all this stuff's being done. It's quite interesting the amount of time I talk to people and I go, all right, so who do I actually deal with? Who actually owns this? And they're kind of like you hear crickets. So that's where that governance piece comes in, and just making sure we've got all those right responsibilities and are in place as well.
I think that's very important from a risk management point of view as well, because one of the elements which I see missing quite a lot from particularly less mature organisations' websites are things like access to a privacy policy, like how we're going to use your data, any legal terminology on the website. Like you will see, for example, acknowledgements of country, but you won't see legal statements about the website. And it's quite clear that they've gone down the path of, let's just make sure people feel good and we tick a whole bunch of boxes from one side, but they actually haven't consulted with a legal professional about what information has to actually be displayed on their website, or at least have links to on their website, to ensure that they are covering themselves from a risk management point of view. Now, that's obvious that that's being driven then by marketing and not then by someone in the risk team. So that connection through governance and ownership to ask those questions as, are we ticking not just the, that it looks pretty and it works beautifully and it's attractive and it's got good content and the right messages, but has it also got all the legal compliance and IT compliance around it, which are two major risk management questions.
Definitely. Like, I know a privacy statement's so boring, but it's so critical. How we collect your data is so critical as well. Just in the last couple of weeks, getting back to governance, like keeping a simple register of images. I had another client who was hit up because somebody had put an image on that they weren't supposed to put an image onto their website, and now this other company who owned the rights is now asking them for back payment. So it's all what I call the not sexy part of web design. It's what a lot of agencies don't talk about because it's not sexy. It doesn't make you feel warm and fuzzy. But as you rightly pointed out, from a risk management point of view, it's so critical to make sure you're doing all that non-sexy, boring stuff, so you don't get caught out later on and having to, make back payments or being caught out some other way.
But that, I suppose, there's the non-sexy part, which is, of course, all the risk management and compliance side of things, which is an essential, where that is essential, especially for NFPs who are held often to a much higher standard than any other business. But let's talk about the more sexy component, which is how it looks and feels and operates. Now, what I do see very early on in organisations' approach to websites is they get their sister's brother's girlfriend to do their website for them, which they jump on WordPress or Wix or something of that nature, and it's usually sort of a one-pager and it looks okay, but it's quite clear that it has been done by someone who's not actually a website professional. And there are certain elements which I think organisations need to think about in how a website works and flows and draws people through the information. What do you think is some of the critical capability that a good web designer should be bringing to the table when working with any kind of organisation, including an NFP, versus the DIY?
Yeah, look, once again, this is not overly sexy once again, but it's really coming back to what I said right at the beginning, is that a good web designer will understand the client, will understand the customer, I should say, and then be able to translate what those customer needs are, like really drill down to what those customer needs. All right, I keep saying that multiple times because it's so important. What a customer wants compared to what they need are two different things. So you really need to be able to drill down to what the customer need is, what they're trying to achieve as part of the experience, and then what a good designer can do is now build what that user experience flow looks like, and how it's going to get the customer or the visitor to the website through the transaction or through the process that you want them to go through with the least friction as possible. So that's the difference. When you have important information and it's like 4 clicks through to down the page or whatever, that's just, for me, it's like, no, you can't do that. It's not working. It's not providing any value. So a good designer will, as I said, will understand what we call the user experience flow, making sure that happens in a nice, seamless way, and be able to bring, elements, call to actions, to places where people would typically look as well. So if you look at heat mapping on a website, so we can you can put software on your website which shows where people are clicking and that sort of stuff. People tend to move in an F shape. Okay, so what we mean by that is if you see the heat map, everyone's clicking up the top on the navigation, they'll come down a little bit, and they'll go across a little bit, and then they'll come down a little bit more, and then they tend to lose interest or they've clicked off somewhere else. So if you have your most important information sitting on the bottom right-hand corner of your page, you're most likely it's not like getting seen. It's been missed. So that's what a good designer knows as well. It's like,
so if you're putting your donate button at the bottom of your page, you're probably missing a trick as well.
Yeah, that's right. So I know that it sounds so simple when you speak about it, but it's proven to make sure, okay, have we got the call to actions in the right spot? Are we not overdoing it? And that sort of thing. So yeah, I guess that's one big difference.
Yeah, well, it is. It's a massive difference, because ultimately, if you're going to spend money, and in reality, a good starting point to think about as a budget would be, what do you think, if you're wanting, a good, it might not be high, very big, high end, lots and lots of pages, but where do you think we start when it comes to a budget for a professional website?
Where do I start? It's a minimum of 5,000.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, once again, it comes down to what sort of functionality. So that 5,000 will just give you a basic, get you up and running type of site that at least will look after one customer persona. But once you start doing the functionality and you're dealing with multiple customer like audiences and that sort of thing, that's where, I guess, from there the budget needs to increase to make sure you're getting the most value for your dollar.
Yeah, well, I think that's a good, reasonable point. And I, over the last 10 years, when we've looked at different types of web designers, that 5K mark is the average starting point. And really, once you're heading below that, you're starting to get into the realm of web designers who probably aren't completely up to date with everything they need to be. It's not necessarily going to have all of the security and things that are required around that platform. $5,000 is going to get you a nice looking website, especially if it's, your first, decent website that you're putting out for a not-for-profit. That's fine, but you've also got to add on some maintenance budget to that. So definitely, even if it's, a few $100s a month, just to make sure that you're getting the checks done, to make sure everything's compliant, all the links are working, etc., especially your donation link, obviously, or any forms that you're wanting people to sign up for mail lists and things like that.
Yeah, forms is so important. They break. Unfortunately, they break.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and that's actually a space which we see a lot of breakage, and a lot of where not-for-profits don't realise that people are actually trying to sign up or contact them, but they're not getting anything through, and they don't realise till 6 months later when someone says, "Oh, I've sent something through on your website, but I never heard from you." Most people aren't going to tell you that, so they just assume you didn't bother contacting them back, especially if you've got something like volunteer with us and that form's going nowhere. Then you're missing out. So a couple of key takeaways from our discussion today. One, as a not-for-profit, it's important to start with understanding who you're actually building this website to connect with. Who are you talking to? What's that primary audience? To look at connecting with a professional web developer, being able to walk through that user experience process first, making sure that you've got clear branding guidelines set up before you start just going out there trying to build a website. So you've got something to actually provide to your web designer, to really make sure that you've got the right budget attached, not just to your build of your website, but also some budget to maintain it, to make sure it continues to stay compliant and working and functioning the way you want. And also just to make sure that you're linking your website as a key resource of your organisation into your risk management and your governance components of your organisation. So, making sure that whoever is responsible within your organisation for those elements is involved in your website project as well, so that they can make sure that they're ticking boxes. The other thing is, I suppose, making sure all those stakeholders who may want to have a say are consulted with as early as possible to make sure is there certain content they want conveyed? Is there an annual report that's got to be downloadable or something that they want to know about? Are they happy with the look and feel? Keeping them abreast of the process and giving them opportunities to provide feedback or input, but also showing where's the deadline, where after this point any changes mean we're going to have to pay a lot more money to have rework done. What kind of resources have you guys got that could be helpful for not-for-profits?
Yeah, so on our profile page, not-for-profits can go and have a look at our resource section. I've actually have a few checklists which you can use. There'll be like a governance checklist, or self-assessment. There's a website planner as well, which is just a simple spreadsheet. We'll also be putting on there like a marketing strategy canvas as well, so that'll be there for people to just at least get them started on the right foot with all these types of with the website project and with their marketing in general. So and by all means, feel free to reach out if you've got a question. Always happy to help.
Fantastic, Brad. Well, look, I'm recommending that any of our NFP organisations take the advantage of checking out those materials and those resources that Brad and his team have provided. Thanks, Brad. Great information, and I'm sure this has been helpful for NFPs out there who are looking to build their website.
That's great. Thank you again, Kerry, for taking the time and letting me just talk a little bit more about what we do.
Excellent. Thanks for that.
You can find out more information about Clarity Lab and the resources and services you need to grow your NFP at www.nfpocean.com. NFPs can join us for free.